Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Patchwork Podcast. I know it's been a while since I posted, but it's because I've been very busy with work, and that actually brings me into this video today. I'm interviewing Natalie Daniels, who is an incredibly accomplished runner, an amazing athlete, and she's a mom, and she even just ran a marathon 4 months postpartum and was number one in the female category, which is insane and so impressive. I've been running since I was in first grade. I ran competitively for a long time. I love running. It's my favorite thing in the world. So it's so cool to get to interview such an amazing athlete, especially in the sport that I love. So the quality might be a little bit lower because the interview was through Zoom, but nevertheless, it is still such an amazing conversation. We talk about her experience competing, her PRs, her thoughts on the women's sports issue, and her experience in competing alongside people who have identified as transgender or non-binary, and her thoughts on how fair this is in competition. So this interview is in collaboration with XXXY Athletics, the only athletic brand to stand up for women's sports and spaces. They are absolutely amazing, and it is just a conversation between Natalie Daniels and I on everything going on in women's sports right now. So please enjoy. We all know the time, dedication, and hard work it takes to be a professional athlete. Female runners train hard every day for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to compete at elite levels. Professional competitive athletes make sacrifices and they can handle losing, but what they won't tolerate is inequality. Natalie Daniels is here to issue a challenge to sponsors to make races female only, and she is here with us today to talk about it. So, Natalie, you just placed first in the female division of the Myrtle Beach Marathon with a time of 2 hours, 51 minutes, and 54 seconds, only 4 months postpartum. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it was a very surprising result, but it was really fun.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So I hear that you are really frustrated that women who are training their entire lives for moments like this, just like you, where other female athletes have been displaced by a man who couldn't make the cut in the men's division. So I wanted to start by hearing a little bit of your background in running and your experience in competing, as well as if you want to go through your PRs in the 1600, 5K, half marathon, and full marathon, because I would love to hear all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been running since I was a senior in high school for a team. So I played tennis most of my life growing up, but I was really bad at it. So I kind of did it for fun. But then as I got farther along in high school, it became more competitive. And I was just kind of like, oh, I don't necessarily want to do this anymore. I mostly do it for fun. But in order to not have to take gym class, you had to have 4 seasons of a sport. So I signed up for cross country because they didn't make any cuts. And I still wasn't very good, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And so that just kind of started me on this path of just like learning to love to run first, just for fun, and then learning to love competing. I ran competitively for a D3 school when I was in college, and I still wasn't super great compared to a lot of my teammates, but I learned a lot about how to be a good teammate, how to support the other women I was getting to compete with, whether they were on my team or not. Just having kind of the respect for all of the things that we have to deal with to get to a starting line. And then just kind of really learning to love that team atmosphere, especially in a race. So just as like a recent example, I trained and raced with a group out of Northern Virginia, and we competed as a team in the Cherry Blossom 10 miler that was this past Sunday. So having a group of motivated, competitive women to train with and work with has been something that's always sort of motivated me throughout my running career, which is now more than half my life, which is a little kind of crazy to think about, or about half my life. So I started running in 2009 with teams, and then, working hard and pushing myself with other kind of like-minded women has made a huge difference for me. So I PRs, if you're interested, 17:19 is my 5K. 10K is 36:15. 10 mile is technically 59:29. I ran that during a half marathon, but in an actual 10-mile race, it's 60:15. 1:19:15 is my half marathon. And then 2:44:52 is my marathon PR. And I ran that when I was 4 weeks pregnant.
Oh my gosh, this is so impressive.
So.
So you also just had your first race back since having a baby, right?
Mhm.
Okay. How many
Yeah.
kids do you have?
One. This is my first.
Okay. Oh, congratulations.
And he's a boy. His name is Cooper.
Oh my
These are
goodness. He's
cute.
precious. I saw so many photos of him. He's so cute. But tell us a little bit about your training and returning to competition after being pregnant.
Sure. So when I was pregnant, I raced, my goal was to race at least once per trimester, which I succeeded in. But it was definitely a struggle. So there were whole periods, especially of the second trimester and the end of the third, where I like couldn't run at all. It was hard, but I was honestly very motivated by the idea of doing Boston 6 months postpartum. So in September was right around was when we had to apply to run Boston. And it was a pretty low point. It was right at kind of the end of my pregnancy. I had I guess like prodromal labor symptoms. So it's like Braxton Hicks contractions, but more intense and like regularly occurring. So I just like didn't sleep, was like constantly in pain, miserable. I had like pubic symphysis dysfunction, which is where your like pelvis feels like it's coming apart. So I was pretty low for somebody who's very active, who, um, you know, I'm motivated by setting goals, by doing races. So I actually I remember signing up for Boston and then immediately going out and just like shuffling through 8 miles and being like, whatever happens, we're going to get to the finish line of this race, like as kind of a celebration of, you know, womanhood, motherhood, all of these things, just saying like, just because I am a mother now, it doesn't make me any less, competitive. It doesn't make me want to do this thing that I love any less. And, the early postpartum time, I think for me was really, really wonderful. I know that it's not for a lot of moms, but I think it was really special and like a great experience for me because I kind of got right back into it as soon as I really felt like I was able to. Um, Cooper and I were out there in the jogging stroller, and he was coming to races, and he comes with us to Saturday morning long runs with the team. And so getting to share that with him has been kind of like an extra special, like it hasn't changed how I feel about running. A lot of people told me that, like, oh, once you're a mom, you're not going to have any time, you're not going to even want to do it. I think it's made me love it even more because I get to share it with him. So he comes to on Saturday, we volunteered at the Cherry Blossom Expo. And so he's like in a front pack, just like hanging out. And he gets to kind of experience all this, this fun atmosphere. Um, yeah, so I'm excited to take him to Boston. It was my first Boston Marathon. And, for him to see and just be a part of it, like, because I think it's something that I do for me, but now it's something that I get to enjoy with him as well.
Absolutely. While we're talking about the Boston Marathon, so when looking into their policy and guidelines, the Boston Marathon and other races now allow male athletes to compete in the women's category under certain conditions, is my understanding. What message do you think this sends to female athletes?
I mean, what it said to me is, so I paid my $250 like everybody else, right? And I did that with the expectation that I would have have fair competition, have a competition that had integrity in the results. So I have done races before where people have cheated. They've cut the course. Actually, my first 5K postpartum, a girl cut the course and like tried to take second place from me. And that is very small time, right? Like that is
Right.
something that, I mean, this is like a community turkey trot. This isn't the Boston Marathon. But even there's like this feeling inside of like, how many times has this happened to me? How many times have I lost out on being able to be, that level of pride in myself? How many times have I gone into a race expecting fair competition and I don't even know how many, like what, who's doing what?
Right.
And so I think when I signed up, this is maybe a little off the top of your question, but when I registered for the Boston Marathon, I qualified as an elite athlete, as a professional runner. I didn't get into that field, even though I would have liked to be in that field. I didn't get to go to the BAA and say, hey, I identify as an elite athlete, so you need to let me into this field. And it's not fair if you don't let me in because that's how I see myself, right? I had to accept, hey, this isn't the place for me. My place is in the women's open field.
Right.
And I accept that. Um, I think when I saw that they were letting in male athletes into the women's field, like what that says is that we don't care about the women's competition. What that says is the women's field is all about being kind and being inclusive. And the Boston Marathon is not inclusive. Like it's
Oh.
not meant to be. There's a standard for a reason. Like if this is the type of race that you want to have is one where, people have to qualify. People work really hard to qualify. I know women who have one of my good friends ran she qualified and still didn't get in
Mhm.
because you had to be, I think, like 7 minutes under the standard.
Mm.
You know, so she doesn't get to run it at all. But here is a male athlete, at least one, right,
Right.
who is now disrupting that entire all the way down. That whole integrity of the field is lost because similar to like somebody cutting the course, we don't if there's one, we don't know how many more there are. We
Right.
don't know, while we're out there on the starting line, you're not observing everybody, counting the numbers of people in front of you. Your result at the end of the day doesn't really mean anything.
Right.
When you look at how you place among your peers, because we're not being compared to our peers anymore. And I think for me, just having gone through, different seasons of being an athlete, different seasons of being a woman, there are a lot of challenges that are somewhat unique. You're not necessarily comparing yourself to other women in the field based on those, but we all know that we've experienced them. Does that make sense? Like,
Absolutely.
a male athlete isn't going to be thinking about, gosh, I really hope I don't get my first postpartum period on
Yep.
the starting line of the Boston Marathon. Like, I am a little bit concerned about that. There's just things like that where it's like you're coming in already with this huge biological advantage, but then it's not enough, right? It's what they're saying is that, the integrity of the women's race just doesn't matter. The integrity of, no, God forbid anybody ever do anything to the men's race. Like, would they allow somebody taking performance enhancing drugs
Right.
in the men's race? No, of course not, because the men's race is for competition and the women's race is apparently for being kind. Like we see that in kind of the rhetoric around, these high school athletes who, whenever they say, "Hey, I am not comfortable or I am not going to compete against this male teenage boy in my, state championship," um, you are, they get kind of lambasted of like, you're not being kind. The role of women's sports is not just to be kind. It's to be competitive. It's to be encouraging and supportive of your other female athletes, but it's not an open field. It's not a fun run.
Right. I look back even to my time in high school competing and then competing in races outside of high school. And I was one of the faster females on our cross country team, and my times were about middle of the boys team. So like the guys that weren't
Okay.
really that good, that's where I was running with them. And it's
Yeah.
it's unfortunate to think about because I remember that it brought me so much joy and peace being able to run and to compete, and the adrenaline rush you get before the gun goes off and you get to run, and like it's just the best feeling in
Yeah.
the world because the competition. If a guy was standing right next to me running, I would feel like a loser because I'm like, what's the point? You're going to be so much faster than me. It's
Right.
not about winning, it's the beauty of competition and fairness in that though.
Right. And so just to kind of like, I have a little bit of a silly story, but so the Myrtle Beach Marathon, there's a couple of out and backs, which is kind of, it's almost like fun. There's little sections of the course where you go out and back and you can kind of see where you place. And so there was one at a little after 10K. There's one a little bit after like 16 or so. And then there's one more right at the end. And so in those moments, I am eyeballing like marathon bibs and women. And I'm not, I was competitive. I knew I was winning, but I'm like, all right, this is how much farther back she is. Like I need to make sure I'm staying on track. But I'm like we're encouraging each other. We're like, you go, girl, you got it.
Yeah.
And I've had that before where I'm, second, third, fourth place. And when I'm doing the same thing, like this is how much faster I need to run. And when women do that, when we, that's a really healthy, I think, cool part of being a female competitor is I feel like we are all looking at each other as pulling each other along.
Yep.
So we're not out there just to beat each other. We're out there to, move the needle for all of us.
Yeah.
And so, I'm looking back. I'm seeing second place. We're cheering for each other. We're congratulating each other at the end. But the funny story is that on the starting line of this race, there's a guy in a banana costume. And in my mind, I'm like, all right, I got to beat the banana. The banana takes off the line and is like way in front of me, right? So I don't start to reel the banana back in until like 21 miles. And I catch up to the banana and I end up passing and beating the banana, but only by like 30 seconds. And so I was using this kind of as like it's a little bit analogous to this issue of trans people in women's sports in that you have somebody in a costume and they are, he came in 22nd, right? I came in 21st overall. That's men and women. I was first female.
That's amazing.
So he was 22nd, so he's right behind me. Um, but look at how he would have, ha ha ha, he's the fastest banana. Isn't that cool? He's, whatever. But what if he had been dressed up as a girl?
Yep.
Suddenly, he's not 22nd, he's second.
Right.
Suddenly, he's displacing the second place woman who ran 303. He's moving the needle unfairly. So it doesn't matter that he didn't win. It matters that he's displacing and making it seem like that woman's 303 was not impressive when it was. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, so it changes the entire dynamic of the competition when you have somebody who, he's not mediocre, but it's a guy in a costume running a race, almost beating all of the women.
Yeah. It just brings me back to that point that you'd mentioned earlier about it's so basic and it's so frustrating that people are seeing this as offensive, but it's biological differences between males and females. You just had a baby. You
Yeah.
don't know when your next period's coming, if you're going to be cramping, if you're going to be bleeding. You don't know what you're going to be going through. And so many female athletes go through this where you're working so much harder to be able to compete at that level after all of the things your body goes through as a woman. And had
Right.
he just been dressed in a different costume, it's crazy how different things could have been in that race.
Right, exactly. And I think that it sounds sometimes like a little bit of a silly example, but what if we had set aside a third category for bananas? You know, like he's first banana and all he had to do was show up in a banana suit. He
Right.
didn't have to, nobody's checking, nobody's saying like, no, this is for humans only, or like it sounds like a silly example, but it's very easy to translate that to a man in a dress up as a woman.
Right.
Um, and there's a second part of this too that, there's as someone who like you, like I'm often at the front of a race. We have a big race in my town, Fredericksburg, Virginia, where it's a half marathon and I ran it last year. I was 4 months pregnant and I won it. Um,
Impressive.
and so afterwards, there was this news article that was printed, and it was all about the first place male. And they interviewed the first three guys. They cover the top 10 men before even mentioning that a woman ran the race at all.
That's crazy.
And so a bunch of my friends like called him out on it, right? They were like, "Hey, there was a really cool story here about the first place woman. Like she's from Fredericksburg, she's pregnant, she has this kind of beautiful story." And he said, "I have to make decisions about what is interesting to my readers." And like that wasn't interesting. So women already have to deal with that. We already have to deal with this kind of degradation of women's competition in general. People already think women's sports aren't interesting, or they already think women's sports aren't important.
Right.
Now we have to add this to it of like, well, they're so unimportant that it really doesn't matter if they also become men's sports.
Right. Right. Well, and it also
So,
it does diminish your accomplishments because when you look at these amazing female athletes that are like, if you look at Caitlin Clark, now everybody cares about the WNBA when no one ever
yeah,
cared about it. So when you have an
right.
amazing runner like yourself that's coming in 4 months pregnant and placing first in a race and nobody wants to hear about it, it's kind of crazy to me that difference in how much people care about male and female sports. But the reason that people are caring about male sports more is because they are better than females. And that's not mean to say that about females because there's so many amazing, talented
Right.
athletes that are females, but there's a difference.
Well, and it boiled down to, in this guy's kind of estimation, is that it's easier to cover men's sports because they finish faster. Like,
Right.
you don't have to spend as much time,
Yep.
which is just like basic fact. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have to hang around at the finish line a
Yep.
lot for very long. I think it frustrates me in the sense of like, we already have to deal with all of this. And now we also have to add this to it. And I think there's like when we're talking about one of the things that really frustrates me is when we're talking about in this climate of like NIL, which I am too old to have ever taken advantage of NIL. So if I get it a little bit wrong, forgive me. But um, in this world of which you can get sponsorships, you can get sponsored ads on Instagram that you can partner with different brands for, you know, those brands are not doing they're doing what this newspaper guy did, right? They're just looking at whoever's the fastest and easiest to cover. They're not like drilling down. Scouts for schools are looking at results lists. They're looking at national champions. They're looking at state championship rosters. They're not looking at, well, was the state champion a trans girl or was it a biological girl? All they're saying is like, hey, we want first place. We don't want second place.
Right.
And so it just, and then it filters all the way down, right? Like it immediately takes and that's just basic fact. It's just like they're looking at the fastest people. They're not doing that deep of a dive. They're not looking at the pregnant woman crossing the finish line. They're looking at the fastest people. And it's that, again, like you said, it's not to degrade or to say that, women's sports aren't, just as important. It's just to say that it's just a function of simplicity. And so that by allowing that to happen, it's a ripple effect. Like people aren't, as soon as you start allowing men to take podium spots from women, you move all women down however many notches. And that has real repercussions for our like further opportunities.
I wanted to ask you about this. So I might have these numbers wrong because my furthest distance, I've done a half marathon, so I'm not sure what the
Woo.
marathon qualifying times. But from what I was looking into, the Boston Marathon has, well, they have three different categories for qualifying times, even though two of them are the same. They have men, women, and non-binary runners. So
Yeah.
there's no difference between the women's time, qualifying time, and the non-binary time. It looks to me that for the category of 18 to 34, it's a 3 hour qualifying time for men, but women and non-binary are 30 minutes back with 3 hours and 30 minutes. Does that seem accurate?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I think that is accurate. I think it gets faster next year. I think men is 2:55 next year and women is 3:25. But yes, that is accurate.
Okay.
And an interesting part of that is that, so I did the Cherry Blossom 10 miler on Sunday. and I ran 60 minutes and 15 seconds. And I was passed at the end by a couple of individuals who were running in the non-binary field, and they got awards. I was the
Like a
58th
whole
overall woman. Yeah, but it's like biological men who ran in the non-binary field, but they got awards for running basically the same time that I did. But I came in 58th female, and they came in like first, second, third, whatever. And
crazy.
so it's just it again. It's like this idea that women are not impressive enough to deserve this level of attention.
Right.
Um, so that's a unpacking a little bit of a different frustration I have.
Right.
Um, but there's something, it's almost like there's something in this whole atmosphere right now that says that, being a female athlete is basically like just not, it's like the worst thing you can be. So I don't know if you know who Nikki Hiltz is. So she represented us in the Olympics in the 1500 this past year. She is a biological female who calls herself trans non-binary, but she has been very vocal about the fact that she finds it, I forget the exact wording right now. She's resentful. That's it. She's resentful that World Anti-Doping and USATF won't allow her to take testosterone and grow a beard and still compete in the women's category. And she doesn't compete in the men's category because she would get smoked. And we're talking about one of our best 1500 runners in the country, like represented the country in the women's field. And she is embarrassed to be called a woman, like refuses to be called a she, and then is resentful that she can't take testosterone and grow a beard and still compete in the women's field. So what is the women's field supposed to be? Like, this is the atmosphere that we have now. It's like the women's field is now going to include men dressing up as women, and it's going to include women who are taking a performance enhancing drug. There's just no integrity left in that. Like, there's no celebration of feminine strength, being a woman, competing, working hard, putting in the effort against all of these other things that we have to deal with. And that is really at the heart of my frustration, is it's like, if we don't stand up for it, we're going to lose the whole thing.
Right.
There's going to be an open field and a men's field. And it blows my mind that we are in this place, like as if Title IX was designed, to let in trans runners and women's field. Like,
Right. It's what's the point of it
which
all?
what's the point of even having, like, that's the whole reason for Title IX, was to give women as a specific sex equal access. And instead it's been just bastardized to be, oh, well, now it's this inclusive thing. And that inclusivity covers, the most insane examples.
So, the Boston Athletic Association says that non-binary qualifying times align with women's times as they are inclusive, and we do not yet have enough data. And I was looking into this, and it says that there's no required documentation, and they say it will expand non-binary opportunities next year as well. And then I was looking into some studies, and which this is so basic, you don't even need a study to tell you this, but it says males run 11 to 20% faster than females based on distance. And we all know that by establishing a mixed sex category as the female category, that they are reducing female opportunities and female athletes' chances to enter and to compete.
I have a lot of thoughts about that.
Yep.
I'll start with this one. So Puma Running, running brand, announced earlier in the winter that they wanted to do a kind of basically sponsor a number of athletes who were running Boston and London. Now, the standard to be considered for this was 305. And that standard was for men and women and everyone in between, because they said that it wasn't fair to and it was going to be too much work to like delineate two different standards, three different standards, four different standards, whatever. And if they just said, well, we'll just make it 305 for everybody. Except when you look at the numbers, and I wish I had this up, I wrote it down when I did some detail, some digging, and I sent them an email about why this was unfair. I think it was like a couple hundred women at the Boston Marathon last year ran under 305, and like 4,000 men ran
Oh,
under 305. So the caliber of athlete that they were willing to take, women has to be way higher than it does for men. And that's how I feel about this non-binary field too. When you do things like that, when you merge the standards together, what ends up happening is women lose out. So you're going to have far fewer biological women who are able to meet that standard, that non-binary standard, and it in an extravagantly large number of men.
right.
So it becomes, and I've seen this on social media, it becomes this kind of look at me place of like men who can't get into the Boston Marathon, as a man have to, go this route. And it's almost become a little bit of a joke, but it really does kind of take what it is it just continues this rhetoric of women are just not that interesting or important.
Right.
And we need to give biological men more opportunities than we do women. Now, there's another side of this. There is a biologically female marathoner who takes testosterone in sufficient quantities to grow facial hair, completely change her body to look more masculine. She's very, very muscular. This individual chooses whether she wants to run as a female or non-binary based on what's advantageous to her.
Right.
So she has competed in races where she says, no, I need to be considered a female so that I can get this access to this other race. Or in this case, in cases of the World Marathon Majors, she'll run as non-binary because she knows she can be more competitive in it. So, at the Boston Marathon, this individual, prior to taking testosterone, was running like a 3:30 marathon, which is impressive. She's now running like a 2:40
Right.
because, as we know, testosterone is a performance enhancing drug. I can't believe I had to say that. But you have,
So frustrating.
when you open up these opportunities, you now have it's like women who are taking performance enhancing drugs, and you have mediocre male athletes. And all it does is it's just is deflecting away from the sport. I don't know. It's just it's like so what is the point of having standards at all?
Right.
Kind of thing.
Exactly.
And now at the same time, I'm glad that they're competing in a separate, like I don't want this girl competing in the open women's field either.
Right.
But it all it does is just basically is like, well, you can either compete in this field or you can compete in the women's field, whatever feels right to you on that day. And we don't see this problem in the men's field. So why, you don't see people clamoring to compete. You don't see Nikki Hills clamoring to compete with men.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because we know that they're better than us.
Exactly.
We know that they're faster than us. We know that we can't be competitive unless we're hyping or taking all these drugs. Like, again, this is a little bit of a rant, but it frustrates me that, instead of focusing our attention on building and encouraging more women to compete, we have to deflect and like do all this other stuff and share the opportunities that we have, which are limited.
Well, and it's even more crazy to me too that we have done this for so long where we have had male and female categories for nearly everything, where if it's in sports, if it's in locker rooms, beauty pageants, sororities, and fraternities, like we have always separated things by sex and there's never been an issue. And the problem with gender ideology is everything else is going to start to crumble if we lose that little tether on reality that is knowing
Right.
that there is a difference between male and female. Everything else is going to fall apart along with it.
Right. And this is one of those things that was really disheartening to see in that, I'm still breastfeeding and there is a lactation space at the Boston Marathon. They were one of the first marathons to offer that, which is, incredible. And even in that like most primary female thing that like only women can do it. Only women who are mothers can do it, and they have to dehumanize us.
Yep.
It's like now it's lactating person and
That's
it's
eating.
chest feeding, and it's like you couldn't eat. Like we have become, like you said, so untethered from just basic reality that it's like not even when you offer a service that can only be used by biological women at its core, like not even there do I feel like I can be safe in a way. Like I hate using that terminology, but it's like I can't even go in there and be confident, like I'm going in here to breastfeed my son before I run this marathon. And it's not going to be shared with like, who knows, whoever identifies as a lactating person on that day. Like it's insulting and it's dehumanizing.
When I was looking into the history of the Boston Marathon, they used to ban women from the race, and
Mhm.
they obviously now they let men run as women. And Catherine Switzer, so she was a 20-year-old college student when she had registered to run in 1967 in the Boston Marathon. And this was her first marathon. And they had said early in the race, the race director, Jacques Semple, charged onto the course and tried to physically rip off her bib number and remove her from the competition. But her boyfriend pulled him out of the way. And despite everyone trying to convince her to quit, she kept going and she finished the race. And now it's this huge moment in women's history. And I guess I kind of wanted to ask, it used to seem like we'd made it so far from where we used to be for women, but do you feel like we're now going to have to start doing these really bold acts to be able to make our voices heard now?
I do. And I think that it's difficult because I feel like it's hard. It's becoming harder. One interesting thing about that specific example with Catherine Switzer is that one of the things that the race director said in her biography that I read like 15 years ago, so I might be getting some of the details wrong, but he said that he couldn't have a woman in his man's race because it would mess up the integrity of the men's race. How can men compete? Men can't compete against women. How are they going to rank themselves when I don't know how many women were in front of me. That messes up how I view myself and my race result. Like, look at how far we've come from that. Like, so
Right.
now it's basically like, oh, now there's no difference at all. And yeah, so I do think we have to speak up. I think this for me was a big this was the first time that I personally will have to compete against that I'm aware of
Right. Yeah.
a male women's race. And I only know that because, people found out. People really, knew what their policy was on it, and they know that there are men who have entered in the women's open field. I think from top to bottom, I think it's really important that female athletes, start having these conversations, start saying it more boldly than we have been. I've seen a lot of discussion around this in terms of like, well, this trans athlete is, not that competitive. They're not winning the race.
Doesn't matter.
But, there's one trans athlete in particular in this year's Boston Marathon, the one that I found out where I was like, I can't believe this.
Right.
That individual ran about the same time as my friend who got denied from the Boston Marathon for, because she wasn't fast enough,
Mhm.
So there are real repercussions. It doesn't matter. Like, she's not going to win the marathon, but she was denied an entry that was given to a male athlete. That is in It goes all the way down to the very last finisher. I don't care if you're running a 6-minute mile or a 10-minute mile. You as a female athlete deserve a result that reflects reality, that a result that reflects the integrity of the race, of your competitors, of the effort that you put in. And that, I think that, it can't just be people like me at the front. It's not, it's important that, at the front of a field, now at the Boston Marathon, I will not be at the front of the field. In other races, like it's important that, the podium is correct because that's very visible. But every female athlete deserves a result that reflects reality. I
Absolutely.
don't know if that makes sense.
Do you know how many males are competing in the women's category in the Boston Marathon, or like an idea of it?
I don't know, but I'm guarantee you it's more than that one. I would guess it's probably in the field of 20 plus thousand, probably closer to 50 to 100. I don't know for sure. I just know based on the number, the types of people that I see.
I wanted to share a graphic with you that I'd found. So it's girls' high school sports places stolen by boys competing as trans. Yeah, what it's showing though is that track and field is the number one sport where these medals are being
Yeah,
stolen. This is like heartbreaking to me again as someone that put my heart and soul into running since I've been in first grade, and to see that so many girls are losing out. Thing is too is, once you're competing in high school and it's your senior year, colleges are looking at you, junior colleges are looking at you. And if you're just like how you said, if you're not placing in those top categories, nobody gives a crap. And so if a guy
right,
ahead of you and you're behind, no one's looking at you anymore. No one cares because you're not
right,
fast enough.
right. And I think even looking at like local rankings, right? When we start including male athletes into women's rankings, who is getting knocked off? It's female athletes.
Right.
And like scouts are looking at those lists, they're coming to meets. They're not necessarily looking at you and thinking, well, I don't know, is this a male or a female? It's they're looking at the times and they're looking at the results. So I think like stuff like that, it doesn't surprise me, and I have thoughts about that. Just in terms of track and running in general can often be a very individualistic sport. There's a lot, I've seen a lot of excuses being made that, well, those girls just need to learn how to lose better. And what they're not realizing is it's not losing the race that they care about, it's losing these other opportunities that come along with it. Because it's real and it's tangible. And I think a lot of people see, they're like, well, maybe these girls in this 200-meter race just need to run faster. And you don't realize they're not looking beyond that 200-meter race. It's all of this other stuff that goes into it. If every race of your season, you're out there running as hard and as fast as you can, and you're still getting blown out of the water by somebody who's not trying as hard, it's disheartening. It's like it's going to wear down on you mentally. You see it. I've coached. So I've coached middle school and high school track and cross country, and this is one of the things that does get to be kind of tough when you have somebody in your conference who is just like really dominant, like a really really fast runner. There's so many things that so many ways that I try to like turn that narrative of like, well, I'll never beat her into a positive. It's like, well, she was in the same place that you are at one point. I've had athletes who are freshmen or sophomores, and we're talking about, a senior or somebody. It's like, she was in your place once too. Look at how much work she's put in. Look at how she's committed to the training, and, look at the things that she's doing as an athlete, and, have respect for it, right? We can't do that. It disrupts that entire train of thought of, when we look at really impressive female runners, we're looking at it through the same lens that we see ourselves in some ways. Like, I have the potential in me to be as good as this person. When you have a dominant male competing in the women's field, you can't say that. You can't look at them as like because they have this inherent biological advantage that you are never going to be able to touch. So it just disrupts this whole motivation stream of like, maybe someday I can be as good as this person if I work really hard, if I, commit to doing the extra work. It's demotivating. It
Right.
says, okay, well, maybe this is as good as I ever deserve to be.
Exactly. And it's sad too because I think a lot of people think when we're having this conversation that we're degrading females by by acknowledging the disadvantage, because it's also not to say that there are females that can beat males. There are plenty of them that are faster, that are more athletic, that are stronger, but
Right.
that's not what we're seeing in these competitions. What we're seeing is males that were generally already faster than these women or stronger, whatever it may be, and then just switched over to the female category. And I'm not saying it's only because they sucked in the male category, but it's obviously really awesome for them because now they're not only getting, sponsorships, because everybody wants a trans person on their team now. They're having them speak for their company. They're getting medals, they're getting money for it. And it's absurd,
Yeah.
you know? So I wanted
Right.
kind of close out this conversation by asking you, what advice would you give to younger females if they are put in the place where they either have to compete against a male or have one in their that's in their locker room or on their team or competing against them? What advice would you give to those girls when they're going through those situations?
So this is tough because I think there's a few different ways to look at it. When I found out that there were going to be men in the women's field of the Boston Marathon, my first instinct was to drop out. So I think the first thing I would say is to think about the stage on which you are competing and what can you do within that stage. So does it make sense to sit down on the starting line? If that's the case, do it. When I was kind of thinking about it, and actually when I sent an email to Sarah initially at XXXY, it was to say, like, initially I was going to contest the charge on my credit card and say, like, you can't charge me for a race. Like, I paid for a race that had integrity in the results. I paid for fair competition and I'm not getting that. So give me my money back. I'm not going to participate. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, there's an opportunity here to make a public declaration that, like, I am here, I am going to compete, but I am not going to ignore this. I'm not going to pretend that it's okay. I'm not going to claim that I accept it. I'm going to show up. I'm going to race the best that I can. I'm going to support and encourage other females. And I am also going to say, no, I don't approve of or accept these men as competitors in the women's field. So I think that's something I would say to kind of younger women. So if you have the opportunity to take a public stand while also, demonstrating your own talent and ability, do it. I do think that there are times when it makes the most sense to, get your like-minded teammates together and say, we're just not going to do it. We're not going to compete. We're going to take a knee. We're going to sit down on the starting line and you can run by yourself.
Yep.
Um, I think, unfortunately, that especially with younger athletes, the onus is really on leadership. It's really on your coaches, and your administrators in your school, to embrace reality instead of this narrative of, the minority is basically making all the decisions for everybody else. So it's a complicated thing. I'm not going to pretend that I. One of the things that frustrates me about some of the rhetoric from the side that I agree with usually is that, well, why are these girls still competing?
Yeah.
Well, because they have to. They
Right.
have no other opportunity. Like, if they want to get a scholarship, they're going to have to run some races. They can't just sit down.
Right.
Even if that scholarship might be less than they would get if they were, in first place versus second or third. But I have a lot of sympathy or empathy for that of, it's not always, I think, the best thing to just bow out at some point. There was one, I saw it today, there was a girl on a podium who did a thumbs down, as the male was taking the gold medal at
Yeah.
a state championship. And it's like stuff, just something as simple as that is saying, I don't accept this. Like, you have put me in an impossible situation and I am going to make it publicly known that I don't accept it.
That's what we
That's
support
it.
at
Yeah.
XXXY, because it's too complicated to say that every girl should just quit the sport or stand down, because we've seen like with Stephanie Turner in the fencing
Mhm.
stuff that just happened. That's more individual. It's just two people. So she's making
Right.
a huge impact by what she's doing in that. And I thought that was an amazing and super brave choice for her. Other people that are some of our affiliates that are so amazing and so brave, and they've joined the lawsuit against the NCAA or spoken out about the
Mhm.
players on their team, but they're continuing to play with them. And I don't see anything wrong with that because those girls still don't want to miss out on their sport and the memories and the competition. A lot of them are in their last season of playing, and you don't want to miss out on that forever. And I totally get that too. Like both sides, you've just got to look what makes the most sense sometimes.
And even looking at that, I think it was the San Diego State players that you all sponsor or work with. That was sort of motivation for me in this. So I was like, well, they're still choosing to compete and choosing to because they deserve to. Because in some ways, that gives the men what they want. Is if none of us compete, they have to try even less hard to beat us. So yeah, it's a complicated thing. I think there's a lot of power in boycotting
Yep.
and in sitting out, but there's a lot of power in like Stephanie Turner showing up, getting there, and then not doing it. And then there's also power in continuing to participate, but making it known that you don't agree.
So, Natalie, do you have anything like any other commentary, anything you wanted to give before we log off?
No, I don't think so. I'm just excited to get out there
Oh my God.
in like a little over a week.
Well, we're all going to be cheering you on in Boston. I hope you do amazing, and you'll have to let our team know how you did and where you placed. And if
Yeah,
anything crazy
definitely.
happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll have to have you on
Yeah.
again. Thank you guys so much for watching the interview. I hope that you enjoyed everything. Feel free to comment anything below that you would like me to talk about or your thoughts on everything going on. I would love to hear if you agree with me, if you disagree with me about the women's sports issue and why. I'm always open to hear out everybody's perspectives and their sides because I think it not only makes my belief stronger, but it also helps each of us understand the other side better. And also, how am I ever supposed to be able to defend my beliefs if I don't know the beliefs of the other side? So please feel free to comment whatever you'd like. And thank you so much for watching.